Hey guys, this is part 2 of our introductory material for The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis. Today we're going to be focusing on the preface that Lewis wrote in 1945 as a kind of disclaimer, as well as giving context on why he's writing this novel, as well as kind of major things to be looking at while reading the allegory. So, first thing that he mentions is William Blake. Again, last video lecture we mentioned about William Blake's marriage of heaven and hell, and he wants to make it clear he's rejecting that. That's the basis for the novel, is a rejection that good will eventually come from evil. That there's this marriage of evil with time becoming good. And Lewis does not like that idea. He completely rejects it, and the novel is basically a rejection of that. And to give you examples of why there is that rejection and there cannot be a marriage of heaven and hell. So he then goes on to say that life is a series of decisions that must be corrected to bring you back to the good. He paints this imagery of a tree and says that life is basically a bunch of branches coming from the trunk. So we go throughout life and we go to a fork. Then we have to make one decision or the other. We make one decision, then there's another fork, and it just continues on and on and on. And what we realize is that at some point we make wrong decisions. And that time won't correct you on that course. You would just continue to go off course further and further and further away from the good. Even though you make good decisions through some of the bad decisions, it still leaves you off base of where you're supposed to go. So he says that to be good, or to experience this good, you have to go back to where you messed up and correct that decision. Basically, what this is to tell you is that goodness and evil is a choice, and we'll talk about a little bit about that choice. But first off, it's a rejection of evil, saying that the choice must be the opposite of evil. It also says that it's a personal choice, that it is the personal decision of us to go the right way versus the wrong way. And then lastly, as I mentioned before, time does not heal or rectify the situation, but rather good and evil are stark differences. He also goes on to mention that it's important to know that when you choose heaven, you're not necessarily losing anything. Choosing the good is not losing anything beneficial. He says that earthly loss, even though, as the scriptures say, to pluck out your eye or lose your hand, that is, you're not actually losing those things because they were never beneficial to you in the first place. Obviously, this is hyperbolic. Your eye, you need to see. Your hand needs to grab things or function in life. But what it's saying is that anything that causes you to choose the wrong decision or to choose evil is never beneficial to you, so losing that isn't losing anything at all. He goes that life, or earth, if chosen, turned out to be hell all along. What he's saying is not that earth is this hell that we must escape. He's not talking about this transcendence of the temporal, but rather that a life on earth without heaven, i.e., and heaven can be almost understood as this state of being with God. So when we talk about good and we talk about evil, evil meaning a life absence of God, and good being a life in accordance with God. So when he says that earth is hell all along, is he saying that earth in the absence of God is hell all along, of a constant decisions of evil? He's not saying that earth is hell, but the world with a rejection of God is this state of hell. So that goes on now to know more about the allegory. What we have is the protagonist, and it uses the first person of I, so we can assume either Lewis or some self-reflective protagonist. It's not really significant, but the protagonist experiences hell, and then he goes into this heavenly state, this hell state and heaven state. And what's interesting to note and we'll talk about it once we get into chapter 1 and chapter 2, is that the hell state is almost this transience of spirits, of nothing completely real. And then when he goes to the heavenly state, this garden imagery or this wilderness, this jungle, it's described as painful to the spirits. When they pick something up, it weighs a significant amount more than what you would expect it to on earth. The grass goes through their feet because they're spirits. And so what he's saying is that earth is this life of transience. What he's not saying is to transcend away from anything enjoyable on earth, but rather these evil distractions from the pure heavenly state that was seen through Christ and God is much more valuable. Therefore, in comparison, it is nothing. It's not saying it is nothing, but rather in comparison, it is nothing. And so what's interesting to conceptualize is, what is C.S. Lewis trying to say through making this statement about earthly states, heavenly states, hell states, and this rejection of good and evil, and making a personal choice? What he's saying is that evil is simply a decision against God, against the accordance of Scripture, against what God states is of value. Therefore, choosing anything outside of that is the personal decision for evil. Therefore, choosing outside the context of God, it can never be good. So you're always left with evil. And likewise, choosing good in accordance with God cannot lead you to evil. They are in stark contrast. And then he ends with a final disclaimer. He says that this state of days off and spirits visiting heaven and, oh, okay, yeah, I'll go there for a little bit, see if I like it, and if I like it, I'll go stay there for a bit. He's saying this is not theological. He's not arguing that this is how the afterlife works, and he makes a claim, I don't know how the afterlife works. I can assume there's a heaven because of Scripture, and I can assume there's a hell state, but there is no idea of visiting other places. He rejects that notion and says, if you believe me to have that theological view, you're incorrect. This is a thought experiment. This is to show you, if given the chance, will you accept it? It's almost this idea of in earth, this absence of God being almost hell. Can we accept heaven? Can we accept God in this circumstance if it means giving up the distractions and giving up the evil? So that's all we're going to talk about today for the preface. Next week, we'll be starting the novel and get into some good discussion of allegory, metaphors, and what he's trying to say in this introductory section with some characters that he meets. So I'll see you all next week.